Hi everyone, I'm Donna Druchunas, and today we are going to explore some things in Procreate with SAW Sequential Artist Workshop peeps who are into Procreate. And I'm going to pin or spotlight my iPad for everyone and show you what we're going to do today. I made this crazy image to illustrate a bunch of things from the adjustments menu that you can use for color, texture, special effects, and all kinds of things in Procreate. So here's a list of what we're going to go over today. So we're going to talk about how to make our line art transparent. This is a different way that I saw recently than what I may have mentioned to you in past videos. We're going to show how to save and load selections, which is really useful. And I'll show you some reasons why. And we'll talk about making sure we duplicate the layer or copy and paste our canvas before we do some of these special effects so that we don't ruin accidentally our whole project. And then we're just going to go down the color, the adjustments menu in Procreate. And there's things for color, there's blurring, there's texture. And then at the bottom, there's two things. I don't know how to categorize them, but liquify and clone. Liquify is the best tool ever. And clone I use occasionally to fix little things. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start with looking at some transparent line art and how to protect our work from getting ruined and using blurring to make gradients like these. Because Procreate does not have any gradient features built in the way other products do, like Photoshop or other ones that you may have used. So I've just got some layers here of different things. So I'm going to turn off all my layers, and you can see my background of this image is tan. Okay. And if I turn on this layer of drawing that I have, that has a white background with black drawing on it, I can't see through it. I can't see my background. And this has come up in questions and various things that we've talked about on the Mighty Network and in these videos. You know, why can't I see my background? Or if I erase on this, oh no, why is my erasing not matching the background? It's because sometimes we have a white background on our line art, and there's different ways that you can get rid of it, get rid of the white background so you just have the lines. But this one's super easy and very cool. We talked a little bit about blending modes in the past, and when you click on the layer to highlight it and click on it a second time, this list comes up of what's called blend modes, and it's usually on normal. That's what it starts out at. The ones above normal have to do with things that are darker, and the ones below normal have to do with things that are lighter. So if you go all the way up to multiply, only things that are darker than white will show up. So by setting a layer that's black and white to multiply mode, you're essentially making it erase all the white. The white is still there, but the multiply blend mode hides white. That's one of the things it does, because it's a one that's dealing with what's darker, and white is obviously not in the darker frame. So I thought that was really cool way to do that without having to extract your lines or try to select and erase the white or anything like that. You just change that blend mode to multiply, and bingo, the white's gone. I can see my tan background. If I erase something, it shows all the way through to the background because it's already, the background's already showing through. So, okay, so that was one cool thing. Now, the second thing I wanted to show you was make sure you duplicate your layer or copy and paste the whole canvas before you use a lot of these effects that we're going to look at. So let's turn on some layers just so we have something to look at and talk about how do you know when I should duplicate a layer or copy and paste my whole canvas. If I'm going to be messing around with, I only want to work on this shape, if I only want to work on that shape, or if I only want to work on this rainbow, then I'm going to work in the layers. And I'm going to duplicate the layer before I do anything to it. If I want to do something that's going to change the whole picture, I have to first go into this tool, wrench, and say copy canvas, and then paste. Nothing changed on my screen, right? But what I have now is one layer that has everything that was showing on my canvas. So if I wanted to do something that was going to affect my whole picture, I would do this. And this would be typically the very last thing that you do to an image, because once you have it all merged, you can't go back and then work on the different layers and things. So you won't be doing this a lot, but sometimes we'll come to it, especially in some of the color corrections. You may want to do a little tweaking of the color on your image, and there's only way to do it to everything at once is to merge it all into one layer. And we want to save our layers just in case. So use the wrench, copy canvas, paste. It makes one layer with everything in it, and it's a duplicate. It doesn't destroy anything else in your image. Okay, so we're going to look at here is these little pictures I made. So I have my line art, and I colored some of the pieces in pink in a layer just of solid color. Okay, so that's just the solid color, and then this line art goes over it. And so I'm going to duplicate that layer because I'm going to mess around with the color. First, I'm going to mess around with the color because we're going to do gradients. So I'm going to duplicate that layer. Now I have another layer to work on. So before we work on some little gradients inside there, we're going to make a full screen gradient just to show you how to do a basic one. Like I said, gradients are not included in here as a feature. Okay, so to make, say you wanted your background to be a gradient, and all we have is the option of turning it off or picking a solid color, right? So I've made a layer. Now I'm going to color one half of it one color and one half of it another color. And you can do that straight up and down. You can do it diagonally. It doesn't matter how you do it. So I'm going to pick my selection tool on freehand, and I'm going to do it diagonally. I'm going to select like half of my image. I'm going to pick a blue color, and I'm going to fill it. Then I'll turn off the selection, and now I'm going to pick a yellow color, and I'll drop it in the second half. So I'm just using the color drop. I selected the part first so it would only fill half, and then it fills the rest. Okay, so super easy to make this into a gradient. You go into the adjustments and go down to the blurs. And I use the motion blur for this because you can do it in a direction. And I do it in the direction opposite or perpendicular to how I angled my colors. So there you go. We have a full screen gradient. It's not quite as flexible as some other programs, like I said, because we're kind of making up a gradient that's a feature that's not there. So you'll notice that even when I pulled my pencil all the way down, the blend still left solid yellow down here and solid blue up here. So the only way that I have figured out to kind of fudge with that or make it bigger is just to pick the transform tool and pick that layer and make it bigger so that the gradient part is bigger and the solid corners are smaller. And you can move that around. So that's the essential thing of making a gradient in Procreate, is that we are going to paint something with solid colors and then blur it. So you don't have to just do the motion gradient. You can use the motion blur. You can use the other blurs as well. For example, if I turn this on, you see I made a little blur on the face of my character here. So how did I do that? I went to my layer that I duplicated. So this is the one I duplicated. So no matter how much I mess it up, I still have the original. I took a color yellow. I took a nice solid brush. I used a flatting brush that I use on comics a lot. And I made her face yellow like that. Now, what I want to do is have this selected, because I can't just blur it. Let me show you why. I'm going to use Gaussian blur. If I just blur it, you see how the pink blurs and it's not in the lines anymore? Okay, that's pretty, but it's not what I was wanting to do. So if you don't select anything and you pick blur, by default, this is going to do the whole layer on the whole canvas. So we'll undo that all the way back. When you have the blur selected, you'll notice at the top, there's a little triangle and it lets you say layer or pencil. If I pick pencil and then go in and pick a brush that's not so flat, it could be an airbrush. I'm just picking a gouache brush there because I have it. I can blur with my pencil. And well, in this case, this brush isn't working. It's blurring a little bit, but it's not really giving me that much of a difference. I can try a different brush. So you can get a little bit of blurring that way, but oh, that one worked good. So that's another way to do it, is that while you're in the blur, if you don't have anything selected and you're just trying to blur a small area, you can click on this. And instead of blurring the whole layer, you can use your pencil to blur it. Okay, so that's another option. But this is my favorite way to do this. We go all the way back to this. And before I color her face yellow or anything, I'm going to select with my automatic selection. I selected the picture frame. Is it always 60% when you blur with the pencil is a question in the chat. No, that's the default. It always comes up to 60%, but you can change it. I don't know why it comes up to that. I believe that you can do some kind of dragging to change it, but I haven't really messed with it that much. Okay, now I have this selection. So I could go ahead and paint my yellow and so forth, but I want to show you something special you can do with the selection. I can go to this little heart here while I have something selected and select save and load, and then click the plus. Now the selection of that particular item is saved. So if I change this, I can still go back and select this exact shape using that save selection. It stays saved in your document in this list of save and load, even after you go back to the gallery and close Procreate. When you come back to this document, your saved selections will still be in there. So there might be two things I want to do with this is it might be, I want to select all three of these sometimes. So I can save that as another selection. So then I could go in, say, save and load selection. I want to select all three. No, I really only want to select one, all three, one. And you can make any kind of selections and save it in there. So that's kind of handy if you think you're going to want to select another thing again. Okay, so we've got the shape selected, and I'm going to pick my brush, and I'm going to take my flatting brush, and now I'm going to paint my character's, put a little glow around her face. And now when I go into the magic wand adjustments and Gaussian blur and drag it, it makes a gradient inside the shape, but the shape stays inside the lines. Make sense? So that's the only way I could find to make a gradient, and it works. It works in all different kind of shapes. So that was just a circle. So, it's just blurring out the circle. You can make a gradient in the rainbow too. So let's select just the rainbow, and just for the heck of it, I'll go ahead and save that selection so that I can select the rainbow later. This is handy because maybe later I decide to cut the rainbow in half, or I make a hole in it or something, but I still want to be able to select the whole thing. I have that there. But for now, we have it selected so we can paint inside that area and not go outside the lines. So I'm going to pick some colors for my rainbow. I already got pink, so I'll put a little bit of blue in it. And then this is not real rainbow colors, but what the heck. And I'll put some yellow in it. Okay, so now I have, my yellow didn't make it to the edge. Now I have three colors in that, and I can do the same thing there. While it's still selected, see my selection is still highlighted. I go in adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I can make a gradient. So you see here that you can make the gradient with more than two colors. It doesn't have to be only two colors. You can do it with as many colors as you want. And so, yeah, when I drag the pencil to the left or the right, while it still has the Gaussian blur there, you can see the percentage changes. That's what Beth was asking about before in the chat. When you switch to the pencil, it's 60%. And I don't see any way to change that. So it might be that it just is stuck at 60%. That's how the pencil works. That's something I'll look up more. So the difference between the layer versus the pencil, yeah, that's a question here. Okay, so if I go into the blur, it comes up. If you have an older version of Procreate, when you click Gaussian blur, it's going to pop up and say layer or pencil. The newest version goes to layer automatically and has the pencil feature hidden, because it seemed like most users blur the whole layer. So we're going to go ahead into Gaussian blur, leave it on layer, and when I drag it and blur it, it blurs everything in the layer. You see, it's blurred these three things. It's blurred my rainbow, everything. But what if I only want to blur a little piece of this? Then I would go to the pencil and see, I can just blur what I want, not everything on the layer. Yeah. So, so that would be like another way to do this without having a selection. If I just painted this character's face yellow and then went into blur, and I kept it on, into blur, and we're going to pick pencil, and I kept it on my same flatting brush. So a big flat brush seems to work good. I can blur her face inside the oval without blurring the edges. So using the pencil is one way to get a localized blur, and using a selection is another way to get a localized blur. Can you do it with one color? Yes, like you can blur just one color. It blurs into something else though. Like if I try to blur in the middle of this pink, it's already solid, so it's not really doing anything. But if I blur it into the background or into transparency, it'll blur and make a gradient from solid to transparent. Deb, is that what you're asking? Like, can you make a gradient with one color would basically be going from solid to transparent?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what I was asking.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
yes, your second color can be transparent. If we want to go back to what we were doing before and add a new layer, and say I want to put a gradient that covers one side. And remember, I selected half of my drawing. Doesn't have to be half, but I picked half. And I'm going to say, I'm going to put a gradient that goes over this half and leave that half transparent. Now, if I go in, nothing selected because I want to blur the whole layer. I pick motion blur because I want a direction. And see it's opaque here, and the other side of the blur is transparent. So yeah, you can do it with one color fading to transparency as well.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. The only other blur there is the perspective blur, which you can try. You can mess around with these things. It doesn't work so great for gradients. It's more for if you're drawing, in perspective action comics. I could see it used in drawing for like manga or superhero comics or something. I've never used it for anything, but it works in accordance with perspective if you're drawing with perspective guides and things. So we'll skip that one because it's a little more complicated than what we're going over today, but just know that it's there. And at some point, maybe we'll get advanced enough to do a lesson on perspective drawing and look at how perspective blur can work with that. So let's see, what was I going to talk about with this? Yeah, so you can make your line art transparent again by setting it to, if it's black and white, multiply mode. Duplicate your layer or copy and paste your whole canvas, depending, so that you are changing a copy, not the original. Sometimes I just duplicate my whole file before I go on and mess around with it, but always when you get to a point where you put a lot of work into something and you like it, duplicate it before you do more stuff to it. And then that's just some ways that you use the blur features for making gradients. So, okay, I'm going to show you a little bit more about saving and loading selections, and a little bit about the color and texture adjustments that are in Procreate. So I picked this drawing to show you it because of the way I put this drawing together. I think it's useful to look at. Down here are my characters. And in this particular drawing, I made each character with 2 layers, lines and flat colors. And I kept them separate. So there's lines and flat colors for each character, and they're all separate. So sometimes some artists draw all their inks on one layer and all their flat colors on one layer for the whole page. I did not do it that way. I don't want to merge these together for whatever reason. But say I decide I don't like the pink clothes and I want to be able to select the pink clothes and do stuff to it over and over again. Right now, I'm going to have to go into 3 separate spots, pick select. Gonna go to the layer I want, pick select, automatic, choose the, whoops, I was on the wrong layer. See what I mean? I'm on the witch, okay? Select, automatic, choose the pink. Now, can I switch layers and go tap and hold select again so it comes back up and add and choose, whoops, wrong layer. Choose, what layer am I on? I'm on the kid and books. Okay, I want to add automatic. Got it. Oh, there's a tiny piece up there. Okay, now I want this shirt on this one. So I have to go to another layer and click and hold my selection button, add pink, pink. Okay, now if say I want to change the clothes again later, I have to go through all of that to select all of those pieces of pink clothes. So I'm going to do is I'm going to save my selection. Now I can select that whole bit anytime. I can make a whole new layer that's not in that, in the other layers, and I can test out different colors. I can do different things. Whoops, where's my selection? Select, save and load, selection, fill layer. I can move it up, I can move it down. But I can do things with all those shapes at once. Maybe I didn't really want to completely cover those, but I wanted to put a layer effect on it. So with this effect, it's changing it a different way. Anyway, I can select multiple things and keep them as one selection. Now, these are in different layers, so that made it extra complicated. But even if this was all one layer, I would still have to go click, 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 click to get all the pieces of pink. Because Procreate doesn't have a like color select where you click it and it can select everything in the whole layer or whole file that's that color. So in Procreate, you have to pick, like I showed you, say I did, whoops. I wanted to duplicate that. I'm going to duplicate this layer. Be careful when you duplicate layers and try to move them. Sometimes I end up touching things and having multiple layers selected. And then when I move them, multiple layers move. So when you're going to start moving things around, make sure you only have one highlighted so you're not messing up. But so say I had my colors all on this one layer. Well, I still missed one. Okay, that's the one. Duplicate. I'm going to bring it up there, merge it with that. Okay, say I had my colors all on one layer and I still want to select those pieces. I still have to go with select, click, click, click. Whoops, there's another tiny piece. Click, click. So, I still have to do it over and over again. Whereas if I have nothing selected and I had my selection saved, it's 1 or 2 clicks. So this is another reason to do save selections. Okay, so let's just go back to this and look at some of the color and texture things. I think you all have seen hue, saturation, and hue, saturation, and brightness. And so you can go into that and you can make things darker and lighter, make the colors brighter or duller, and just change the whole hue of it. Everything changes together. So you can do that with everything in the layer or with things selected. I think you've all probably used that. I'm going to show you something that's a little more interesting. And we're going to go into a different drawing to look at this. This is something that has like some shading and stuff in it. So if we go into some of these other things, it's it doesn't do as much in flat colors. But if you have things that are shaded, or if you're doing collage and you have a photograph, these things are more fine-tuned than hue, saturation, and brightness. So the one right after that is color balance. And it looks like there's just 3 sliders here, but you see this little star sun here? If you click on that, the 3 sliders are either for the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows. So you're going to only be changing one of those at a time, the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows. So say I want to change my shadows and I want them to be a little bit cooler. And so I can go in and pick shadows, and then I can move my shadow slider to blue or cyan, and it will just change the shadows, the darkest colors in the image. Can you see how that's just changing the dark colors a little bit? And by shadows, it means dark colors. It doesn't know if you have drawn a shadow in your drawing. It's not that literal. Does everything have to be on one layer to change? Yes. This only, as far as I know, this only works on one layer at a time, but we can try that if we want. I can turn on the multiple layer versions of stuff here.
So would you just take your whole piece, if you wanted to do it to your whole piece, and copy it so it was all one
Yes.
layer?
And if you can see here, that's what I was doing. What I had done was I had everything turned on like this. And I have, no, not those. I have all these layers. So I had it all turned on, and I went to the gear tool and I said, copy canvas, paste. And that's why this would be one of the things that if you wanted to adjust your shadows and things on a whole image, you would want to do it at the very end when you're finished with everything else. So don't even bother with this for your first proof or your second proof or your third proof. It's something you wait till you're getting ready to you know, final proof. And I know we all do this, and we all have files called final 2, final 72, F in final 999. But you really try to wait as long as you can to do anything that's going to affect the whole image, because like I said, you have to go back. Then it's harder to go back. Of course, you know, maybe I just wanted to change the dark colors on this image. Maybe I just wanted to change, you know, the darker blue or something. But generally, I find that this tool is more effective or more useful for me at the end point where I'm trying to make some fine adjustments. Another one here, again, using our duplicated canvas. Another one in this that is at the very end a lot of times is curves. You can like go completely nuts with curves. Curves is the most powerful color correction tool in the universe. It is also the most complicated. So I'm just going to show you one little thing that you can do with curves that you may find helps your final images a lot. And that is changing it from a straight line to bringing the lights up a tiny bit and the darks down a tiny bit. It boosts the contrast on your image. Doesn't always work, doesn't always give you what you want, but going into somewhere near the top. The right-hand side is the lightest color. The left-hand side is the darkest color. And I just found a lot of times if I bring the lights up a tiny bit, and I mean, this is a tiny bit, you move this, it makes a big change. So I just found a lot of times I tend to not put enough contrast. I'm afraid of darks. I'm afraid, that if I do that, it really fixes it. And maybe I want to don't use that one. Maybe I want to go even closer and I just want to change the very darks. So wherever you touch the line, it's going to add a dot and that's what moves. And so I usually start by trying at these quarter lines, but a lot of times you don't even want to go that, you want to go closer to the white mark and closer to the black mark because you just want to change the highlights. And again, a tiny, tiny move makes a big difference. I mean, you're never going to be dragging that a far away for basic things. So that's all I wanted to show you on that. If you have a trouble with contrast in your drawing, changing that from a straight line to kind of like that S, where you pull the near the bottom corner, you pull that down a tiny bit, and near the top right corner, you pull that up a tiny bit, it will boost the contrast. That's curves. Let's see. Oh, this is so cool. This other one is so cool. I'm going to turn all my layers on here. My final image here was pretty complicated and it has all these layers. And I actually had, it was kind of black and white for my comic. I painted it in those colors, but then I really, really muted them out. And how I did that was I made a layer. Let me turn it to normal here, normal blend mode, and just show that layer. I made a layer, supposed to be solid gray, but there's a blotch on it. But anyway, I made a layer like that, and I filled it with gray and accidentally drew on it apparently. And then I changed the blend mode to hue. And what that does is it takes all the color out of the whatever's behind that layer, and I lowered the opacity. So you can keep, if you leave it at maximum opacity, there's no color left in those sections. But if I bring it, the more I bring it down, it's just muting the colors. So I had it at 90%. So you can use that for, doesn't have to be gray. It's a nice thing if you want to check your contrast though. If you put it at the very top, if you put that layer at the very top of your stack of layers, and you can turn it on and off just to see if you have enough contrast in your image. But I used it for changing the characters to almost black and white, and then I left the color in the background. But I want to show you something else you can do. And this is, again, a thing you do at the very end. I'm going to copy my canvas from the wrench tool, copy canvas, and then I'm going to paste it. And of course, you could do this just on single layers for special effects, but say I don't want to use full color or grayscale. I want to have a really cool color palette in this comic, and I'm going to use it over and over again. And I want it to be real easy to make the colors. This is what gradient map is for. So I clicked it and it came up. Look, it turned my whole image to a page of greens. And that's because that's the one I had used before. It's got all these greens in it. I had made this before. It comes with some in it that have different, that one's kind of cool, isn't it? Venice. If I picked that for a color palette for my whole comic, that would be kind of cool. Well, what it does is it uses the dark and light values in your image to apply colors. Some of them are pre-designed by Procreate, like the ones that say Blaze, they have names. And then the ones that I made, I didn't rename, I just call them gradient. and I messed around with some funky things. You know, I could have a neon style comic. So it comes with some pre-done, and you can make your own. So if I wanted, say I wanted to make my own, I would click plus, and it comes up to a new gradient, and it starts with black and white. The darkest point is black, and the lightest point is white. Okay, say I don't want any black or white in my image. I want to have like navy blue and almost white yellow for my dark and light points. I can click on that and go around the blue and move it around to a really dark blue. So now there's no black in there. There's just the dark blue. It's not very different looking because it's still very dark down there. You can see how it changes if I move it up higher. So you decide how dark you want your darkest darks to be and what color. And then I can click on my lightest point and say, okay, I want that to be a really pale yellow. Okay, so that's interesting, but you can add more points in here. So I can say, okay, at this point, I want to have a green hue. I mean, usually you can go just nuts with it. And you can move these up and down to say, okay, everything. So whatever this box is saying is that, you know, everything from here, I'm dragging the darker color up, I'm dragging the darker color down. Where's my mid-tone? I can decide where I want my mid-tone to be. And this one's pretty ugly, but you can see how you can create a color palette to fill in images, and you could actually make a color theme for a comic like that. So I'm done with that one. And like I said, it comes with 4 or 5 predefined ones. You can click on them and edit them if you want, the ones that it gives you, and you can make new ones. So I think that is really cool. And if you were going to make one that you were going to use in a comic, of course, you would take 3 or 4 pages from your comic or 5 pages and set up a gradient and tweak it until you got it how you want it and then apply it. But basically what it does is to each shade of gray in your image, it assigns whatever color is clicked at that area, and then between the points that are defined between these boxes, it blends. So you can see the light peach here on the face is kind of a blend between the yellow and the darker peach, and there would be between white and a light gray, a darker gray, and black. So it's applying colors based on the value. You can do this to a selection, you can do this to a single layer, or like this, you can do it to a whole page to apply to a whole comic. So it's completely up to you how you want to use this. I think it's really cool for a whole page, but I have used it in the past for like one character, just or a background. If I wanted to change the colors, I would say there was an ocean in the sky. I could apply a gradient map to that and it will change the colors. So I've used it on single layers. I have never done a whole comic with it like this, but I think it would be so cool to you know, make up a color palette, draw your whole comic in grayscale, and then just plop a color theme onto it with the gradient maps. That's all the color stuff in there. Okay, a little bit about texture, and you can do this to layers or whole things as well. Noise adds noise. Okay, so we're going to go on this. I'm going to turn off the black and white, my grayscale layer here, so you can see her in color. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back and click noise. Make sure I have the layer selected that I want to do. Okay, gonna go to noise. That's the thing, I'm always on the wrong layer. Okay, noise, just like everything else, you can drag your pencil back and forth. Noise adds grit or dirt to the layer, or noise. It's called noise. It's like stray pixels. There's 3 different kinds and 3 settings for each one. So clouds is the default one. When the scale is pretty small, which is normally what people use, is just to add a little texture to something that looks too flat. But if you move the octaves and turbulence up and do it, and the size, it makes these funky patterns. So I could see you using this to like, not with this selection, but say I wanted to design a really cool fabric for a character's dress. I could, create a design like that. So on small scale, small turbulence, you're just adding some texture to it. The more you add, it grayscales it. The noise is grayscale because by default, it is selected to be single, meaning single color. If I collect multi instead, then my noise will be multicolor. So it comes out a little different. Doesn't show up much different when you're on a very small scale. Also, this additive thing checked means it just goes in the selection. If I turn it off, it's like the whole layer gets noise in it. Anyway, noise is one way to add texture to an item, to a background, to your whole thing. But it does, see, I did not duplicate my layer first. So now I've like wiped out her colors. It's okay, because this is just for an exercise, but you could see why you want to duplicate your layer first. Let me duplicate this layer, which is me here knitting, and we can look at another one in there. Well, sharpen won't do anything here because this is just drawn in flat colors. But if you have something that's a little blurry, like a photo in a collage or something, you can use sharpen to make it crisper looking. Bloom makes things glow. So if you're having something with fire and you want a fire to glow on the person, you can maybe not the whole layer, but maybe put something there so there's a glow on her face. Like if I selected just with a freehand and went like that, and then went into there and said bloom, I can kind of make a, well, it's making her face too white. It depends what colors it is already and what you do, but it can make a glow. It might work great on something like this, where I have this this text, this fake, pretty text. And if I select that layer and bloom, see how it makes like a glow behind it? Doesn't work perfectly in this case because I have a light background. But here where it's against a darker background, or if I even move my text so that the word future is against the black, the glow shows up. So bloom is for making stuff glow. Glitch is really weird. It makes noise like on an old TV set. I haven't found any reason to use this yet, but depending what you pick there and everything, maybe if you were, I could see a special effect in a comic where somebody's mind is going nuts or something exploded or whatever, and you wanted to like mess it up. It has different ones. So like, yeah, so like if I could see that if you took some drugs, or for animation, Janice said, different things like that. I have not used this for anything, but it's a special effects, basically. It's not a normal, you can make the colors split and shift different ways. So I could see it for some kind of special effects. Me personally, I see this for like sci-fi comics or something's going with your mind or something like that. That's what comes to my mind. But you just have to go play with it and see what they do. And then Beth showed us about halftones a couple of weeks ago. I won't go through that a lot, but halftone adds dots like in old printing, makes it kind of look like an old comic. And it has full color screen print and newsprint, which is black and white. It has different options. And by dragging your pencil back and forth, you make the dots smaller or bigger. So if you make them really big, that's kind of like a pop art kind of style. Usually you for adding texture to your comic, you'd make them, pretty small. And what it does is instead of having a solid color, the color is made out of dots. So it looks like those old the comics that a lot of us read when we were kids, the way the printing presses used to work, and the colors don't always line up exactly. And you could see the dots because they were so big. That's what halftone does. Get rid of all the halftones. And then chromatic aberration is another kind of special effect thing. It makes like copies of the shapes and moves them in what it calls a perspective or displacement thing. So if I ever find out really other cool things to do with those, I will show you. Oh, and we didn't get to liquefy, and it's already 2 o'clock. And I am not going to do it now because I can do a whole class on liquefy, and that's what we'll do next week. Because you can use liquefy for modifying your sketches. I'll just show you a real quick cool thing. What I mean by modifying your sketches is, say I decide I want this cow to have bigger eyes. I go into liquefy, I pick expand, and I just touch. Now that made his whole head bigger, so I'll go smaller there. I can enlarge my little cow's eyes. Oops, that one looks a little weird because I was too close to the pupil and maybe the pupil bigger. You can do stuff like that. And it's really cool, especially if you're working on your sketch, not on your final line art, on your sketch, because you couldn't do that in drawing. You'd have to erase the eye and redraw it. So you can try different things like changing the size of the eyes, and I could do it on the girl too, and see how that does it, how that affects your image without having to draw it over and over and over again. So that's one really cool thing that you can do with liquefy, and all these things here are things I did with liquefy. So you